Well, we got another great guest coming on again. This may be our second time trying this, but we make do. It's another fresh face. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Eli. I'm Owen. I am a freshman as well at Illinois. I met Jack as he's actually my neighbor, right down the hall. So I met him on the first few days and quickly after found out about Jews with the News as a podcast and started listening. But in general, I try to stay very active and focused on what's happening, with politics and society. And the past few days have definitely been a big kind of, I wouldn't say advancement, more like a devolvement of events, but definite history like made right before our eyes. So I have a few things I think that, struck me off guard or caught me off guard and really made me think about redefining what my own understandings of our government and its capabilities are, as well as where I stand politically with everything, because there was obviously a lot of political chaos that I don't agree with, but even my kind of most fundamental beliefs were challenged. And I think it'll be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great conversation. I mean, we could just open the floor to you. You could just,
Well, sure. Yeah. Do we
say
want
what you
to,
want, and we'll have a
should we
great
summarize,
conversation.
sort of just to catch up, or is it pretty clear that, what we're talking about today is the Capitol insurrection?
Well, there you go. I think most people know about it. So
Yeah.
now that they
So
know, that's what we're
in
covering.
case you were in the coma meme for the last 5 years, Donald Trump became president, and as president, he did pretty much everything unexpected of him. And as one final act, now that Joe Biden has been kind of elected as 46th presidential elect, um, there was this march on Washington for Trump, like a loser day parade or whatnot. And the during this march, from what I understand, he tells his supporters to go to the Capitol, and they go there in hordes. And as someone who also likes watching a lot of movies and likes talking a lot about sci-fi and, dystopian novels, I was a big dystopian novel guy. Um, Seeing it play out live is not something I wanted. Not some I thought I did, but not something I wanted, especially not in like this kind of close to an election and this close off of what was a pretty terrible year. So yeah, the I guess the biggest thing that caught me off guard about the Capitol insurrection is just how easily it happened. These people were not planned out, they were not organized. Um, Unlike a lot of the peaceful protests we saw this summer, and even when some of those protests started becoming violent and when there were clashes breaking out at them, there were plans for how to fix it or solve it or de escalate it. And seeing the lack of that really made it clear both that I don't think there was a real political message behind this aside from we're upset and we're going to listen to Trump. And that was shocking when this got further than any protest this summer did or any conception I had in my head of what a protest could do, as this turned from a protest to a riot to literally, trespassing and breaking and entering into the Capitol building, our nation's government. So, I was just as shocked as everybody else to see that. But, clearing that up, I want to first hear kind of what you guys and some others have said about it so far and sort of understand what the general consensus is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this was something that was shocking to see, while at the same time, almost like not surprising. Like I don't really know how to frame it. One of our previous guests, Cassie, kind of said it better, but I think what I'm trying to say, I think for me, what it was just seeing the blatant irony, both from the people who were trying to break into the Capitol building and from the politicians reacting to that. right? There was a lot of irony going on when, you know, the people breaking in were, you know, a lot of those people 4 months earlier were saying, like, you know, we support law enforcement and, you know, we have to do everything we can to obey the laws and regulations. And there was also a lot of irony going on the political side, right? A lot of Democrats who were speaking out about things like defunding the police, and, you know, even some more radical ideas were, you know, tweeting out messages, you know, like, we have to obey law enforcement now. So I think there was a lot of irony, that kind of came about this week that, for me, just kind of showed the kind of uncovered kind of the facade and the fakeness that kind of embodies DC right now.
Facade is definitely a good word for it, because it felt like, you know, we have this huge, you know, body of government, this bureaucracy that's withstood many wars, you know, withstood attacks and sieges, and has this impenetrable wall of defense. But really, it just was guards opening up the gates for these people and letting them in. So it really was like a veneer there. It was one door in the way, no locks, no anything, and they were able to get into all of these like representatives' rooms, vandalize. Uh, Heaven knows what, you know, they got or were able to find with all of these unlocked doors, unlocked cabinets, and whatnot. But yeah, it really did kind of expose a lot of, I guess, rot in the frame.
Well, I could go on and on and on about, you know, a lot of different things that, you know, kind of showed after this event took place. I mean, there are a lot of angles you could approach this from. There's a lot of, you know, systems that were exposed, just whole like ideologies that kind of just, you know, were also exposed. I think the main point that I want to bring across is that, like, this was inevitable, at least in my opinion. I didn't know to what extent like this would happen, but I knew something like this was going to happen.
Sort of like how Eli said it was kind of surprising, but he's not surprised about it.
Right. I'm surprised. I'm more surprised that, you know, they kind of just went for it. I was expecting, like, when this eventually happened, that there would be more of like an organized, but, you know, they were just like, okay, we're gonna go to the Capitol. Oh, okay, now we're in. Oh my God, we're in. And then they just did that. It's just odd. And
it's surreal, yeah.
Right. I think the term that I use is like shell shock. It's just like, I'm kind of speechless. Like, I just didn't expect this to happen. But if 4 years have gone by where countless officials, elected representatives, people put in place have been enabling this type of mentality for 4 years now. And eventually, if you're getting fed these many lies, and you're told that somebody is stealing something from you, and you are told to fight back, like, eventually something like this is going to happen, which is also kind of, you know, an issue, considering if you look at, I hate to do this, but like, kind of like what happened in Germany, with Hitler's come to power. Like, this is just fascism at work.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think that, well, aside from the fact that, you know, an Illinois congresswoman nearly elected literally quoted Hitler in this rally before it, I think there are a lot of tells to that same both kind of framework of fascism, or these like points of fascism coming across, where it's whether or not it's turning on, you know, previous points you had in your politics, like, you know, Blue Lives Matter or Law and Order, how that they quickly threw that out the window, or whether or not it's that hate and anger building up, and then also probably the lack of organization beyond that, like anger and hatred. So I think that's not too far off there, and especially since, you know, Nazi Germany was one recent example, or in modern day history, of, you know, an attempted coup. I actually learned how there was a first coup several years before the rise to power as well.
1923, yeah.
So, you know, not trying to compare directly here because they're different situations, but like if history repeats itself and history tells us things, it's that one single event, especially now that we're seeing kind of the immediate repercussions of this event, isn't going to totally dissolve the problem. And I think that's the big thing I want to talk about here, is the problem behind this, because this is clearly white supremacy and domestic terrorism in action here. And this is not, I don't think, a political message. This is not some sort of belief mindset difference. This just straight up appears to me to be an attack on our democracy, an attack on our elected officials, and an attack on our freedoms. And I think the irony in that, because there's just so much irony to this, if it wasn't so sad, it would be almost ridiculous, SNL sketch. But the irony in it is that these people are calling themselves patriots, waving a Confederate flag around in the Capitol building. This is so clearly the furthest thing away from what our country stands for. And to clearly establish that this is an attack on the US.
Yeah.
Now,
Go ahead, Jack.
I was just gonna kind of transition. So if you still had something.
No, go ahead. I was gonna also transition.
So you mentioned like the repercussions that are kind of starting to take place. By the way, we're recording this on Friday, which I can't remember what day it happened. It happened Wednesday.
I think today's the 8th.
Yeah,
because
so it happened on the
6th.
Yeah, so it happened Wednesday. Yeah. So slowly but surely, we're starting to see, some repercussions happen after the event. Like, obviously, we won't get to the full extent until we view this from like a historical context 20 years in the future.
But 48 hours out, oh shit, there are repercussions.
It's one way to put it. Would you like to, give your thoughts and opinions on anything that's happening?
Absolutely. I think, well, the most immediate repercussion is how little action was taken by law enforcement. There were 13 arrests or 20 arrests the first day of the coup, whereas daily, I believe, during the Black Lives Matter protest, there was over 1,000. After George Floyd's death, there were over 1,000 arrests a day. So the disparity between the authorities' approach to this is very clear here. But even bigger than that is the fact that it was very clear. Well, it was good that there was a kind of, thankfully, a joint effort by Congress to go through and approve the Electoral College results, now with, clearly less PR in favor of trying to argue these results, because they didn't really have any case to stand on. And now associating themselves with the domestic terrorists didn't seem to be a good idea. So I'm not surprised that the Electoral College results went through. But what did surprise me is how quickly they've kind of given up on seemingly this Congress or this administration. Both the House and the Senate have both called off, I believe, future sittings until the new president has been elected. But even more so, it seemed that an entire part of the Republican Party itself either quickly got disassociated itself with, I believe it was the 7 congressmen who all submitted complaints against the Electoral College, or have just straight up been silent about this and not held accountable in the same way that so many Democrats were, and so many, especially progressives, were, during earlier protests. So the disparity between the initial reactions have been very severe and very eye-opening to me, because it's not like we want them to have to face the same racism, anger, unfair justice treatment, and mass arrests and police brutality as what happened with Black Lives Matter. But the fact that there's none of that. They get the far right terrorists are getting almost hand holding, as literally someone got held hands down the stairs of the Capitol building. They're just getting seemingly off easy. And to me, that's made me realize that, well, one, it doesn't seem to be as unorganized, at least from an administrative or an ideological standpoint, as it seemed. And or two, the fact that these people just can operate and have operated in such a way where they just do not care or do not have to worry about repercussions of these actions. We're seeing now on Twitter all of these people who, all these terrorists who wandered into the building and broke a bunch of things and fought yards are now getting arrested and showing clear remorse for it, but surprised to, as if they didn't understand it was going to be a large penalty, even enacted under Trump, to go and deface monuments and to break into buildings. And ironically enough, all because, he tried to lock down on Black Lives Matter. And it's really ridiculous to me, just the fact that now so many different politicians are looking anywhere but the obvious that is holding these people accountable. And number one, that means holding Trump accountable, but also it means holding all of the congressmen, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and even the different departments in the cabinet accountable. 3 different cabinet members have resigned without invoking anything near the 25th Amendment or doing their duties, because I don't think it's a good idea to resign only to save your own ass. And that's what we're seeing here. So for me, at least, the congressional approach to this has just been pure selfishness, or just continued down the same ideological lines regardless of party. The only progress we've really been seeing is that the Democrats have moved quickly to write up articles of impeachment, and those are going to be emergency voted on Monday. But aside from that, it seemed like there was a real desire, especially from so many kind of elites in Congress, to just move on, whether that be by not going into Congress and having to deal with it and just wait till the next administration, or by quite literally blaming Antifa. And we just know that both of those are ridiculous things. And the fact that they're given legitimacy, I think, just shows the issue once again.
Right. I agree. Like, all these people are saying, like, oh, we're condemning, these actions, and we never incited violence. And I'm sitting here like, they are so lucky that these politicians who are saying they're resigning or making these statements saying they don't approve of the actions, they're so lucky how what's the word, how bad America's memory is. It's like we only focus on things for a short period and then just forget about them. I think a lot of people just don't remember that the first impeachment happened early in 2020 because of everything that happened after. So it's kind of like, now that this has happened,
yeah.
Right, now that this has happened, people are forgetting that for the last 4 years, people like Senator McConnell, and who's now condemning Trump and saying he's in the wrong or whatever, enabled him for the last 4 years. And the fact that he's able to get away with this is the exact issue, is what I was trying to bring up earlier. It's just you put yourself in a system where you continue until it's convenient for you to back out. And at that point, you're just like, oh, it wasn't me ever. And you just completely get away scotch-free with, putting us, the actual people, at a disadvantage. And it's kind of like with the resignations, it's like, for example, Betsy DeVos said that she disapproves of Trump's actions and him inciting violence. That's why she's stepping down. But if you really disapproved, instead of just saving your own ass, you would try to get something to happen or stay in so we can't put in somebody else who would further incite this violence. You could instigate the proper rules to start the 25th Amendment. That's something that you could do to actually make yourself look like you actually cared, but in reality you don't. And
Sure.
Politicians are scumbags. That's my point.
Again and again. Yeah, and I think another same way we see about this saving your own ass is, and I think this is another core principle of fascism, where it's do everything you can to just survive yourself, whether that means abandoning your principles or your group entirely, or even eating your own. Another thing that really struck me is how these maggots were just completely gone from pro-Trump to anti-Pence as soon as Pence said he would certify the electoral college results. And it really, because Pence is entirely complicit with Trump as well. He just did what he was expected to and legally required to. And by doing that, they don't care about the law. The terrorists don't care about, the party he was in or what he did in the past. There's no accountability held to him then, but for the wrong reasons, because now they're saying kill him because he did what he had, or he didn't do what he couldn't do constitutionally, which was to say, oh, I have the power to overturn this election. So it really goes just entirely to show that this is a real issue we have, where people are so focused on a singular thing, which is power, or keeping their politician in power, that they're willing to make everybody lose just so that they can watch their opponents lose, I guess. And we've been seeing this for a long time with, healthcare or the economy or even education and all of these different policies in Congress. But this is quite literally what happened when they insisted that we need a fair election, and we need a fair election as they're trying to overturn a fair election and install what there would be a dictator. So it really blows my mind just how right we've moved, and kind of been forced to move, even because, so many of the Congress people are stuck, held accountable to the system, which to them is binding, and they cannot, break out of it, whether it's filibustering something or trying to lead a prayer on the floor and getting arrested several years ago, like Raphael Warnock was, and just the utter ridiculousness that politicians can be held so strictly to something, but then at the same time, all of that can be overturned by a crowd of angry Trump supporters. It really just shows where the kind of ball is in the court, and it's way further right than anything, democracy should be in. And seeing from that and seeing the responses to that, I think is the most polarizing event of these last 4 years, at least, because in terms of the people around me, it's making very clear, if you are okay with this, you are okay with fascism, or you are okay with the overturning of a fair election, and you are okay with an insurrection, and pointing clear. And a lot of people are afraid to admit that, but they're showing their support by it, by not disapproving of it and not making it so easily clear that this is wrong. And so to both, reiterate that it's wrong, but also to talk out against these people and point them out, it's all I've been kind of engaging with recently. But it's also ridiculous that I have to stoop to this level, or that we have to stoop to this level as educated young Americans and as people in a society, but also just as kind of victims to watching this, all of us. So
Yeah, I think that's really astute. I kind of want to talk about, because we've talked a lot about kind of the similarities between this and, Nazi Germany. We've talked a lot about all these, horrible repercussions of what's happened over the last, 3 days. But there's also been some incredibly good things that have happened in the last 3 days, which are, right. We've had the first Black senator and the first Jewish senator elected to the state of Georgia, right? My Congresswoman Cori Bush announced that her first act in Congress will be to expel, or put in a resolution to expel, the people from Congress who were instigating these riots. And so I'm not saying that solving the state of our democracy is by any means easy or doable, and I don't think Joe Biden is the best person to lead that, attempt. But my question, I guess, is, do you think we should be hopeful, or is now a time to kind of hunker down and stay a little pessimistic?
Well, I love kind of the positivity of that question, because I think positivity is the only way out of situations like these, especially, as we kind of reach a breaking point, quote unquote, with so many frontiers. I think even the smallest victories are ones we should celebrate. But I do think there's hope in the future. And I think well, number one, there's hope in the fact that Joe Biden will become president and that Congress will go entirely blue and become a lot more as needed liberal. But I also think that, like you said, with Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, these little victories are ones clearly worth celebrating. And the fact that a widespread voter registration on the part of the wonderful Stacey Abrams, and then these bills immediately being introduced into Congress from the likes of Congresswoman Bush and Omar and all of these progressives, and then just being co-sponsored by pretty much I've seen all Democrats and even some across the aisle in the House and the Senate. So I do think the fact that even though so many Republicans are jumping ship and trying to act like they were never a part of this, I think the fact that it's clear that there's uncomfortability in the current situation all around means that there's going to be some sort of progress made. Now, I think that it would not be best for our country to get too boggled down in this and try to sort out all of these events, try to arrest all of these people and bring the harshest penalties to any of them. Because as we saw on our side with BLM protests and with so many of the fights for civil rights, it's not worth fighting over singular issues, especially when, there's so much bigger fundamental issues involving them and involving kind of what we're facing nowadays. So yes, I think that while I can really hope that the Justice Department is going to have a field day with all of these criminals leaving office on the 21st, we do have a lot to look forward to. And that's why the night of the Georgia runoff, it was relief, just relief online and relief in person. There was definitely celebrations in my family, seeing that Georgia stayed blue and has flipped blue and looks blue for the foreseeable future. I think that we're seeing that in states like Texas as well, and even Arizona, that are becoming a lot more blue. So politically speaking, at elections, I think there is progress to be made in the fact that more people are voting, more people are being educated on these topics and focused on what not only benefits them, but what benefits their community and what benefits the people around them. And I do think that in some way, with the youth vote especially, we're seeing that it's not as selfish as it once was, or it's not as hateful or decisive or divisive as the media might portray it, when people can understand that they have an opportunity to help people and improve society. And while with issues like kind of racial injustice or police brutality or economic injustice and just real two-sided issues, that might take longer to see these gains as it's slowly inch by inch, bill by bill kind of playing out. But in terms of things that are more existential crises, like our globalization as a whole, or climate change in particular, or what it means for our military or whatnot, I think that where we've only really had the problems from either corporations or our government running wild without any backlash, such as being able to just buy so many nukes and buy so many military weapons, or put all of our subsidies into oil and fossil fuels and pollute the environment. I think that once people start waking up to some of these social injustices, that we're going to see, both socially but also economically, because the economy is what controls America. We're going to see some of these changes play out. So I'm really hopeful, more hopeful than I have been in the past few years, due to this election, but also due to what the people have done out of it. So I'm feeling more positive as a whole, even though there's still really big kind of worries I have about police brutality and white supremacy on the rise in America. But I think that no matter what happens, as long as we encourage people to vote and use their voices, that the majority of the Americans are on the side fighting for more equality and better policies And at this point, we'll just have to see how that plays out in Congress, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that is, well said.
Thank you.
Any hopefulness that we could get right now is always good in especially after the last year, which is just kind of, a year that, most people want to forget. It's good to be able to take some optimism from everything that's going on. So, it's very admirable.
Yes. And just one other thing, I think. I think the fact that I don't think that the coronavirus can be discounted at all in this. A lot of these people out there really seemed, and the discussions about personal freedoms have all sort of grown due to the pandemic. And this feeling that, wanting to be the victim and wanting to feel like you're being oppressed coming from the right wing, who has not been oppressed and has not been the victim of anything and is now confusing that with having to wear a mask. It's going to be interesting to see how the widespread distribution of vaccines and the ultimate end of the pandemic will not return things, say, to previous state, because I do think that we're going to be seeing a lot of changes and kind of our landscape, and that would be something I would love to talk about at another time as well. But I think that in terms of socially or culturally, America is going to be less agitated due to the end of the pandemic, and that I think going forward are two, or at least on my end, what I think would be healthiest kind of re-entering a society of outside of this tragic pandemic would be to have patience and listen to what's been the people's biggest concerns, because I am lucky enough as a white male where my biggest concern is being inside and staying home and having to take classes online and staying motivated on that, or staying sane in the sense that, oh, I want to go outside and not give into that. But there are people out there who do not have the option to stay safe and are fighting for their survival. And so when we come out of this pandemic, it's going to be really, I think, friction when some people are coming out of this looking forward to partying and moving on like there's nothing, whereas some people are still as much, their fundamental issues are still as much there. And I think that's really our fundamental issues then. So I definitely think we need to be wary as a society and as individuals of recognizing everybody's different experiences in this past year, but more so everybody's needs going forward into the future, if we want any sake of restoring a more unified but also more progressive country.
Very well said. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you.
We really enjoyed having you here.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, thanks again. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and I really liked the way you guys kind of conducted this, and I look forward to listening to the podcast and what everyone else has to say. But also, just going forward, I think this issue is going to be one that plays out for a while in different ways. So it'll be very interesting to see. I know just today Trump's Twitter account got suspended, and now of course there's uproar about what constitutes free speech or censorship or whatnot, and how the next 10 days are going to look with the inauguration and new Congress. But I do think there is that hope, like you were saying, Eli, on the horizon, and it's one we should definitely keep paying attention to, because there's opportunity for great change here.
Yeah.
Yes, and we will look forward to talking with you about that, hopefully in a later episode as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I would love to do that. So, all right. Thank you guys for having me, and I'm going to get going now. But, stay safe, stay well, and
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.